Jake, tell me about who did you speak with today? I understand it was a home inspector, but also a keyboard player. How did those two worlds come together?
Yeah, it was a cool conversation. I talked with Jeff Frankenstein. He is the keyboard player for the Newsboys, really cool Christian rock group that I have been a fan of for a long time, actually.
Okay.
But he's also a Tennessee home inspector. So we talked about how we got into home inspecting, some of the pros and cons of doing a pre-inspection, just some of the pitfalls that maybe buyers and sellers come into in the inspection process, and kind of how we got into home inspection from the music industry. He's still in the music industry too, but it was a really cool conversation, and I learned a lot about home inspection in the process, so I think you'll like it.
So you can balance those two worlds, touring the world, and when you're in Nashville, doing a whole other business.
Yeah, he actually said he's leaving, I think, next week to go on a tour. So he's gone sometimes, then when he's back, he's doing home inspections, and he says he loves doing both, so it's pretty cool.
I mean, who doesn't love crawl spaces? Exactly. My feelings exactly. Okay, so I can't wait to hear what he has to say. Let's check it out.
What's up, Real 615? We talk about all things Nashville real estate related. I'm here with Jeff Frankenstein, the man, the myth, and the legend, home inspector extraordinaire. How you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, before we get started, gotta let you know my first band ever. We had 7th, 8th grade, something like that. It was kind of one of those scenarios where everyone just kind of brings whatever song you know to the table. We wouldn't have a genre, so we had one. I was not a Christian yet, hadn't found my way to the light, but our bass player, Mike Nelson, every single day, Newsboys shirt. So it's cool to meet you.
Awesome, man.
Yeah,
That's
man.
great.
A fan of your work as a home inspector and as a keyboardist. So
Awesome.
Great to be
Thank
here.
you. Yeah.
What got you into real estate? How did you become a home inspector?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've always been fascinated with older homes. Lived in a lot of older homes. Ended up moving to Nashville in 1994. Grew up in Michigan, and I was actually one of the first people who ever bought under the age of 30 who bought a house in Sylvan Park.
Nice.
And this was back in the 90s, and but at the time I was younger. I was engaged to be married, and we had found this house. Actually, our guitarist had bought that house next door, so I was like, man, this would be great to be his neighbor. But I was on the road, and a home inspector came in to do the thing after we had an offer on the house, and my fiance was there with him, and didn't go that great, and she called me on the phone. I was in California or something. She was crying. She's like, the house has been condemned, and everything is falling through and whatever.
Did you just find a lot wrong with it?
Well, it was an older home. It was built in 1940. It had the same people had lived there the whole time, and basically it was untouched, so it needed a lot. But, it was a really bad experience for her, and I flew in, and I looked at, everything. I went over everything. I was like, we're buying this house anyway for $80,000 in Sylvan Park.
Yeah.
And it was the best decision I ever made, So I was fascinated with that. We worked on that house for a year, sold it for double. We lived in another house in Sylvan Park that was even older. That was an 1800s place, and learned a lot about houses that way. Anyway, fast forward to recent times. It was March 12th, 2020. Like everybody else, we were watching the news or whatever, and I was riding on the tour bus, and we were going from city to city, and every time we would get to the next place, the show would be canceled. And I was like, uh-oh, something's going on here. This doesn't look good. So I remember sitting in the back of the tour bus thinking, touring is going to get shut down here real soon, and a lot of things are going to get shut down here real soon. And so sure enough, after almost 30 years of doing 180 cities a year, being a music director, I was at home for a year straight.
Wow, yeah.
And did not go anywhere. This is after going to 50 countries.
Sure.
That was my life, was travel. So I get home and I'm like, I've got all this time to do something I really I'm interested in. I've got this opportunity. I've got this time. I may never have it again. So I went through all the education, training, certifications, and got licensed and have been open for business. And it's great, as you know, as a musician too, in real estate, it's something we can go at our own pace, and it seemed like a great fit. And I've always loved just being able to help people. And to me, the part of home inspection that I really enjoy is that it's a lot like touring in some ways. Like you're in a different environment every day. It's just like you're in a different venue every day. There's a different set of people. There's a different set of circumstances. Like touring, there's a lot of stress involved with all the parties, and you're trying to navigate that. It's almost like you're a part-time psychologist as well, in the situation, trying to help these people who are making some of the biggest decisions they've ever made in your life, and you have like 4 hours to do whatever you can to help them make good decisions.
So do you find that emotions run really hot when you're kind of there with the buyers, or what's that like?
It can. It's a wide variety. We joke about it. I always try to go in ahead of the inspection and talk to the client and kind of get to know them a little bit, and ask like, what's important to you? Like what do you need to know? Like what's really important, so that, because our time is limited.
Sure.
We open the door and then all of a sudden we're in someone else's property and we have 4 hours to figure out what's going on in here. So every client is different. Some can walk into a room and don't like the paint color and the deal's off.
Sure.
Others are like, hey, I just want to make sure that like
It's not going to blow up.
it's not going to fall over tomorrow and I'm good. So yeah, it's a very it's an extremely interesting job, and but like I said, I love the part of it of being able to help people who need that information and give it to them. And then, in a way that makes sense.
Sure.
Because I think that's, I've spent a lot of time over the last few months talking to dozens of realtors, and that's been, one of their biggest concerns is, the communication has not been there. It's not been, like, things have not been communicated in a way that makes sense to the client, or there's confusion. So, just being a good communicator, those are really important things.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And so were you kind of a handyman before you got into all this? Were you always kind of fixing stuff? You mentioned kind of fixing up your own home in Sylvan Park. Is that?
Yeah, that's kind of where the interest came from. The 1940s house that we had, that was definitely a thing. And so, yeah, you kind of get in there, kind of figuring out how these systems work. I was always intrigued by older houses, like how people just made do with what they had. Like our 1940s house had like a tree stump that was holding up the joist in the crawl space, and like they had dug all the stuff out by hand to build this, and it was probably the person's family who built this house back then,
Yeah.
And then in our 1800s house, there was all kinds of crazy stuff in there. I tried to remodel the bathroom joists, and the wood was so old that they had fossilized, and we had to like cut holes with diamond tip blades just to run plumbing through things.
Whoa.
So, I definitely was interested in all that, and even learning about like the hazards of some of these old places. Like I'm really grateful for the inspector that did my 1890s place, because he went up there and found old knob and tube wiring that was laying in shredded newspaper that they had put in there as insulation. And so, like, if I had never had the house inspected, I never would have known.
Yeah.
And I just would have moved in, and it was like basically a tinderbox waiting to happen. And two, all credit to the realtor too, because she wasn't advocating for me and saying, look, I'm not going to let you buy this place the way it is. And so she was doing her due diligence as a realtor too. And I think that's an important thing, especially in the time we're in, because things, especially in Nashville, are moving so quickly, and people are putting houses up so quickly. And, like
buy now.
Yeah, having that extra time to just say, hey, let's take a few hours and see what's going on here. And I think it makes a realtor better, because they're offering better services to their client, and it's kind of a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, I think having a great home inspector that you work with as a realtor just kind of adds so much more confidence to the transaction. I think I've had one or two situations where I've worked with an inspector who I'll say was less than thorough, to be polite, and it doesn't feel great. It makes the transaction kind of feel like, oh, we're doing the right. It takes away the confidence from me as the realtor and also as the client. And in those situations, both times it worked out great. There wasn't luckily any issues, but just I guess the inspector did his job well, but the communication wasn't there to give us the confidence we needed to get to the finish line. which I thought was big. So it's nice to hear somebody with great communication.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think too on the realtor side, home inspectors, we kind of sit like in this vague middle ground, because the realtors, they tend to, they don't want it. They want their deal to go through, so they want an inspector who's balanced. Like they don't want to. Like that's the number one complaint I get from realtors that I've talked to. I was like, what's the number one thing that you don't like about the inspector you have or use or whatever? And they're like, well, the inspector sent like a 3,000 page report and it was all marked in red and like we couldn't even get through it all. But on the other side of it, for the inspector, it's like if he doesn't provide everything he sees, then he could be found liable for not doing a comprehensive job. So I think it's like what you said, it's all about how it's presented. And that's one of the great things about technology now that didn't exist back in the 90s was like reports can, you can take them any direction. Like in the 90s, you get a report like on a carbon copy with like maybe a couple Polaroids if you're lucky.
Sure.
Now it's like I can deliver a report straight off the cloud and an agent or client can look at it. It's got like a million photographs. It's got videos. It's interactive. They can pull up the parts they want to see. If they don't want to see the little stuff, they can filter it out. So it's pretty awesome.
No, I love that. I would much rather have a significantly more thorough report, even if it talks the client out of buying the house. Like the last thing you want is somebody running around town, especially in this business. Like we all live here, like know our offices. Like, I don't want you to live in a house that you hate, that's going to fall apart. Like, no chance. So yeah, I think that's great. Aside from a tree stump holding up a joist, are there any other crazy things that you've seen that you can talk about?
Yeah, I mean, we run into lots of crazy stuff all the time. In fact, I did an inspection a couple of weeks ago, and it was an interesting one because it was a beautiful house. It was in Franklin. It was like on a nice lot, but when I got there, I saw that it was like kind of right next to a drainage area, and it was kind of at the bottom of the hill, and it was like it was the last thing between this hill and a drainage area, which kind of like brought up a lot of red flags for me.
Sure.
And so I had looked at the listing and noticed that it had not gone to closing a few times, even though they had offers and the price was reduced. So I knew that something was going on in there. And it was built in the 80s, which I typically like. Houses built in the 80s, like I feel like if a house has been around, for a while, like you know what you're gonna get. Like it's gonna show what's happening. Where like with a new build, you don't know what's happening in there quite yet until you've lived in it for a while. But anyway, I finally got to the crawl space, and sure enough, it was flooded, and like it was just a complete mess. And every time it had rained for 20, 30 years, just water was just coming in through the side, and this was right under the master bedroom, just standing water for who knows how long. And it's interesting because if they would have like not done the inspection, they never would have known. And maybe never even gone under there. It's not always a fun job for me. But so it was cool, and the clients were super grateful. I was able to take the buyers and take them under there and show them and like do all that. So we always encourage the client or the buyer to be with us. Like I'm one of those inspectors. Like it's not going to bother me. Come along for the ride, ask as many questions as you want.
That's good.
And typically that works out great, yeah.
If not, you got kind of like the realtor middleman in the conversation, which is just challenging, so.
Yeah.
So what are some of the key areas that you think home buyers should pay attention to when they're going through inspection?
Yeah, like we talked about, earlier, I think every buyer and client has a different view of what's important.
Sure.
So, I always try to ask them what's important to you to know in this inspection. But there's the big ticket items are the ones that I will focus on first. Like I always tell people everything, 99% of things can be fixed.
Sure.
So it's just a matter of knowing what's going on in here. But it's typically the big ticket items are what we try to focus on first. So the roof, start with the roof. And then your AC kind of stuff, and then you always want to get under the crawl space if you can fit, and just see what's going on in there. And those are your big ticket things. Like most people have tolerance to, especially in this day and age where, people want to get in there, stuff like appliances, all that stuff is relatively inexpensive and compared to, the price of the house. But like, if your roof only has a couple years left and it's going to be 40 or 50,000, you really want to know what's going on up there, or attic, or the number one thing that we see as inspectors that's the enemy of the home is water.
Oof, yeah.
And water is amazing. It will get in places you would never expect and do things that most people will never expect. So we're on the lookout for the big things first. And like I said, the reports are really thorough. So if you want to go all the way down to the little crack in your drywall or whatever,
sure,
we'll cover all that too. But big ticket stuff.
I'd love to know your thoughts. From a seller's perspective, if someone's going to sell, how do you feel about pre-inspections?
I think it's personally, if I was selling my house, well, it's kind of easy for me because I can inspect it.
Sure.
But I'd be really into doing it because it eliminates that the surprise factor.
Sure.
It definitely takes out the drama. I mean, when you're talking about a few $100s to know what's going on in your house before you put it up for sale, to me that seems like a lot of great peace of mind. So, so if another inspector came in on the other side and said, we found this or this, you could be like, you already are in full disclosure because you've had it inspected. You can show a potential buyer.
Sure.
We're going to disclose these things that we know are wrong with it already. It kind of puts you as a seller in a better position. I mean, for the investment of the a few hours and a few $100s, I can't see why somebody wouldn't want to do that. And at least it eliminates the surprise.
Yeah, kind of the fog of war. Out of the way. Yeah. Let's say somebody has a friend who's an inspector or an uncle who's an inspector. We have this with realtors all the time. Yeah. Oh, my aunt's a realtor, whatever.
Yeah.
So I'm a big advocate for having a professional do the job. Mm-hmm. What are some things that can kind of come back to bite you if you don't have a professional kind of do the gig? Yeah,
I mean, like we obviously always have family members there, especially if it's an important decision or if it's young buyers. So we're used to dealing with that. I think, and we take everyone's opinions, and we take it to heart, and are very empathetic towards the views of all the people that are there. But I think that an inspector's training is different than the training from somebody who comes from the trades.
Sure.
And the way I like to explain it, it's kind of like you wouldn't go to your family doctor to get brain surgery. You know what I mean? There are certain people that are specialized in certain things. With an inspector, the way we're trained, it's almost like the family doctor of the house. We may not know how to do the surgery to repair the issue that you might find, but all of our training is to identify defects and potential problems and things that have happened so that we can refer to the proper people to get that addressed. So it's an issue. Like Tennessee is actually one of the more regulated states for inspectors, which I think is a great thing. Like the training that we have to do is some of the longest of any state, and then we have to pass the National Home Inspectors exam, which is a 4-hour exam. That's like closed book. They put you in a room with a proctor, nice. And they just throw multiple questions at you, and it's only like 50% of people pass it on the first try. So it's always great to have everyone's input and questions, but like inspectors training is it's a totally different beast.
Nice. Mm-hmm. So from a buyer's lens, maybe you're buying a place and you don't want to spend the $400 or $500, whatever it is, to get the inspection. Can you talk a little bit about how it's worth it? How that saves you in the long run?
Oh yeah, well, a lot of times the fee seems annoying, to the buyer because they already feel stressed out about
Sure.
this financing, and they're like, oh really, another whatever. But in the long run, the potential savings there to the buyer can be really substantial. For instance, let's say an inspector goes in, he sees that the AC units are 20 years old. He's digging around. He can tell the compressors on his last legs, or without the inspector to kind of notice that or figure that out, they would never know. So you move in a year later, AC's gone, you're out, whatever. At least in the inspection process, the agent can go back and negotiate and say, hey, look, we didn't realize this was wrong or that needed to be replaced. So in fact, an inspector, which is a great part of our job, we can save the buyers literally, $10,000, sometimes $50,000 if it's something that can be negotiated, or if it's a surprise, or if it was something that was not disclosed from the seller or they didn't know.
Sure.
So yeah, it's all about just adding peace of mind. And like really, when you look at the fee spaced out over the 30 years or whatever you might own the home,
80 cents a month.
It could be some of the best money you ever spent.
Now, I think as a realtor also, it's super helpful to actually have that report. It's one of the challenging parts for us is the timeline, and like when we finally get that inspection report, then it actually gives us the ability to really negotiate, because you have your list price, you have your offer price, and those are typically different, and then you kind of agree on something, and then there's always still this piece in the back of everyone's mind on both sides. It's like, okay, well, this is where we're at now, but where are we going to be after the inspection? And that's kind of the ammo that the buyer's agent needs to get a fair price, because like you said, you could be looking at $10,000, $15,000 down the road, and you want to get that taken care of. Maybe you meet in the middle and call it $7,500 or whatever, but it needs to be addressed now as opposed to a year later for your buyer.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a tough spot for buyers because they're already stressed enough, and I think for a lot of buyers, it's just they look at the inspection as adding more drama and more stress. So I think that's a big part of our job as inspectors is to have the opposite effect.
Yeah, I mean, not from the agent side, but as just a home buyer myself, like it's the most buzzkill of an experience we ever get. Like you get that report,
thank you.
Awesome. Like, and that's what you want. You want a great inspector who's going to tell you everything that's wrong with it. But you get that, and you're like, ugh. And anytime I see one that's when there's not anything wrong, I'm like, you must have done your job. There's got to be tons of things wrong.
Oh man, yeah. But there's always going to be something wrong.
Of course,
that's the thing, and that's what I would tell people going into it. I was like, there is no way that this house is perfect, and even if you went to my house, you would find tons of stuff because that's just the way houses are. They're always deteriorating all the time. So it's keeping that in the back of your mind that everything can be fixed. There are going to be things wrong, but we want to protect you and find the big stuff that nobody knows is going on in here if we can.
We had a new build in East Nashville that. Theoretically, there shouldn't be anything wrong with it, of course. It's a new build. That's what I thought at the time.
That's a myth,
After the first big rainfall, our kitchen light, the chandelier, water started coming through the chandelier, which, if you think about it from a rain perspective, like, how is it even getting? It's in the middle of the house.
Right,
how is the rain getting to funnel through this chandelier?
Yeah.
So that was fun.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm sure, do you see a lot of issues with new builds, and does that create kind of a rift with you in the builder at all, or how does that work?
So new builds, actually, a lot of people do have that misconception. They're like, well, I'm buying a brand new house, and so it's going to be brand new. Nothing could possibly be wrong with it.
Sure.
And as we know in Nashville, you don't have to go far. Just drive around anywhere. You can see the speed in which places are being built.
Yeah.
And there is just no way that like code inspectors or the government inspectors can really go in there and check everything to the level that needs to be checked. And so that's why I feel like we provide a valuable service to people, especially in new builds, because there is that misconception. And then, and especially we do a lot of warranty inspections as well. So let's say you're at your 11, you've been in a place for like 11 months, you've got a warranty on the house that's a 1-year thing. We can come in, go through everything while you have that last chance to file a claim on something that might not have been done right. And then you've got that 11 months after the person's moved in where you kind of see what's going on with the house and how it was built. But yeah, there's definitely in new builds a lot of stuff that gets missed. And obviously there's a lot of great builders too.
Of course, yeah.
So you don't want to like throw everybody under the bus, but that's what we're here to do. We're here to notice things before it gets bad.
Sure. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Crawl spaces creep me out.
Yeah.
Do you have any possums or spiders or bees nest stories or anything like that have happened?
Yeah, it's definitely the most interesting part of the job. It's putting on the crawl suit and saying your prayers and opening up the hatch and going where no man has gone before. But if I can fit in there, which I'm not the biggest guy in the world, I'll definitely go under there and have a look. I've been chased by hornets. I have experienced groundhogs, raccoons, Snake. I've been fortunate, no snakes yet.
Okay.
Some crazy in-laws.
Ex-girlfriends, I see, okay.
You never know what you're going to find down there. But yeah, like actually it is one of those things that in your training, there's a lot of safety stuff because you never know what you're going to find. And it's crazy. Your house and you're under it. But so far we're still here, all in one piece. Yeah.
That's one of the things I've contemplated taking some home inspecting classes, and that's the one thing that's my barrier of entry. I'm like, I want to go my own crawl space. Who am I kidding that I'm gonna?
Yeah.
Spiders.
I'm always like curious as to or where you put your ladder is important because I'm like, if my ladder falls, I could be stuck here for indefinitely.
I had a guy recently, and I was talking to him while he was doing some spraying, and typically. This is not what I would think, but I was like, are you just not like afraid of bugs? He's like, oh, I hate bugs. I've hated bugs my whole life. He's like, I actually took this job because I actually get to finally do what I want and get rid of them. I was like, wow, that's a super rewarding story. So when you say to a buyer, say they do inspection and then 3-4 months goes down the road, something comes up and it wasn't on the report. Does that happen?
Yeah.
How does that play out?
It does happen, and as home inspectors, we are capturing the state of the house in a moment of time that we're able to be there. So we can't always predict what's going to happen in the future. And, as we all know, life happens. Fluky things happen, accidents happen. We can only report on what we see at the time we're there. And so we try to make that very clear to our clients that we will go above and beyond and find out everything we can. We'll be as thorough as we can. We'll take everything apart. We'll take electrical panels, but we all know that life happens too.
Yeah. And
so it is an issue for inspectors where people will move in 6 months later and like the air conditioning will break and things break just like cars break. And we're very empathetic to that. Most of the time, clients they understand that we can't control everything. If we check the roof and everything looks good, and then 2 months later a storm blows, a bunch of shingles off and the roof leaks, and then the inspector told us the roof was fine. We can only tell you what we saw on the day. So a lot of that's in our communication. Like at the time of the inspection, these were the conditions.
Gotcha.
We can't predict the future. I wish we could. It would make our jobs easier, but we do the best we can. Yeah.
Awesome. Jeff, has been awesome talking to you. I'm going to put your information in the description on the video. Make sure people need home inspections. You're the guy to talk to.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I want to say thanks to our sponsors, Mission of Truth and Scout Realty, and I'll see you next time.